Welcome back to the HHC Mortar Platoon 2327 How to Mortar 101 virtual class series. For today's class, we'll be doing the introduction to troop leading procedures and operation orders. The instructor will be myself, First Lieutenant Charles Chandler. For references, you can look through TC 3-21.76, ATP 3-21.90, and the No Slack Operations Order Smart Book. So general overview for today's class. So troop leading procedures. These are the steps a leader executes to prepare the unit for a tactical mission. For operational orders, there's three different types. There's the warning order, or warno, operation order, the op-ord, and then the fragmentary order, the frago. The warno is it's very quick, and it just produces the essential information to initiate an operation and to get the further planning done for the operations order, which provides the critical details during each piece of the operation. And then any changes to that come through in a frago, which is, again, off of the operation order op-ord. The frago is pushed out as those changes. And then each of these types of operational orders have 5 paragraphs: the situation, mission, execution, sustainment, and the fifth one being command and control. And then many of these paragraphs have subparagraphs within them that we'll discuss later on throughout the class. So first, troop leading procedures. There's 8 steps to them. First being receive the mission. So this is going to get your initial timeline, your unit's task, purpose, and then the intent for the actual mission itself, which is going to then allow you to quickly transition into issuing a warning order. That's going to, for myself, I'd be briefing the squad leaders, the type of operation we're going to be doing, the general location of where we're going to be, and generally where the enemy is going to be at, as well as the units that we support, the initial operational timeline, and then planning and preparation instructions, so tasking out certain squads to accomplish certain tasks. And that's going to take us into steps 3 through 8. So I just add a quick note that you see there at the bottom as well. So steps 3 through 8, they're done at any order at any time. I'm just going to discuss them numerically here. So make a tentative plan. So this is where the inevitable everything's MET TC dependent. Well, we'll get more into the definition of MET TC. And then COA development. So course of action development here. So step 3 here, we'll go into a little bit more in the next couple slides. But number 4, initiating movement. So that's going to get us prepping our gear, our equipment, the vehicles, as well as conducting loadout. Conducting reconnaissance. This can be done either through map or imagery, stuff that's given to us. And then also just on site, getting our own eyes on, such as when we're trying to occupy a mortar firing point. Completing the plan, so this is when we're actually producing the operation order, and then issuing the order itself verbally, using a terrain model, using graphical overlays, the tactical mission tasks and graphics, the class that I gave before. All this kind of comes into play now for issuing the actual order. And then constantly supervising and refining, so having back briefs, conducting different types of rehearsals, and then doing our pre-combat checks and inspections. So again, making a tentative plan a little bit more defined here, especially with MET TC. So many things, and almost every single operation is going to be MET TC dependent. Everything's always constantly changing. There's no cookie cutter way of going about doing things. There is a science to some of this stuff, such as using systems such as troop leading procedures or operations orders, but the actual execution of stuff's going to continually change based off of these variables. So first, mission. What is our assigned tactical task? Like what are we doing? What's the purpose of it? And then what is the commander's intent? What are they trying to get out of it? So from here, we identify all the tasks that need to be accomplished. They can be specified tasks told to us, such as mortars, a certain task being to destroy a certain enemy asset. There's some implied task with that. So implied for us would be that we set up an MFP that doesn't have mask and overhead to where we can actually shoot our rounds. And then essential task that's going to help us complete the mission, such as doing dispatches for the truck so that we can even take them out. The enemy, so general situation, what are we facing? The disposition, so that's such as looking at a map and seeing where are they actually located at. Their composition, which would be how many of them are there, like what kind of numbers are we looking at, and like what type of enemy element is it? Is it armor? Is it artillery? Is it cavalry? Capabilities, so what kind of weapon systems do they have? What's, how what do they bring to bear to the fight against us, and then their most dangerous and most likely courses of actions, just generally what they plan on doing and how they plan to fight us. And then time available, so this is going to go into planning and operational timelines, any hard times that we have, no later than or no earlier than times. Light data, so that we actually, the legitimate time when the sun goes up, goes down, stuff like that. The enemy timeline, kind of trends of when we see enemy movement and enemy execution of their operations. And then trying to adhere to the 1/3, 2/3 planning guidance. So what that means is when I receive that mission, I'm going to allocate a third of the time from when we have to step off in SP. I'm going to take a third of that time to plan, and then allow 2/3 of that time for the squad leaders to do their rehearsals and a back brief and make sure everyone in the platoon knows what's going on. And then troops available. So what's the morale? What training experience level are we at? What capabilities do we have? And then the leadership based on who's in what position and where people are physically located at. It is critical just to know what we can do and execute, such as if executing split section operations. And for terrain, the area of operation where we're going to be, the area of influence, which is greater than the area of operation. The area of influence is what can actually influence us in the area of operation that we're going to be moving around. The weather being the visibility, wind, precipitation, cloud coverage, temperature, humidity. Yeah, it's good to know like what it is, but then how it's actually going to affect us. Any obstacles, avenues of approach, key terrain, observation fields of fire, and then covering concealment in the area. Just what are we likely going to see when we're actually out there? And then civil considerations would be the areas around us, any structures, any other capabilities, organizations, people, events, stuff like that. That's going to have an influence on the operation. And then a little bit more into making a tentative plan, so course of action development, so how we actually come across creating the plan for us. So first, analyzing relative combat power, like what do we have, generating some options of what we can do, developing a concept of the operation, assigning responsibilities to the squads, and then preparing a course of action statement, which composes of the purpose, the type of operation, what's going to be decisive and why. Decisive being, at what point in the operation do we know, okay, we're going to win this fight? And then what unit's conducting that decisive operation with a task and purpose, and then what's the end state? So kind of what are we trying to get at the end of the operation, end of the mission? So a lot of this is definitely pertinent to the line companies and the platoons, as they are going to be more so executing, closing with, destroying the enemy. But it's important for us to just know generally how these plans and operations orders come about and how the troop leading procedures are executed. So now going forward, we're going to cover step 6 of the troop leading procedures, which is the actual operations order itself. So we've already done the WARNA, we've done all the previous steps, maybe not necessarily in order, but we've been completing them. And now it's time to execute an operations order. So this is something especially for the squad leaders that they can expect from me to be pitching down to them, and then they'll take this information, digest it, analyze it, and then push out what's relative and important for the soldiers to know at their level. So first, starting out the first paragraph being the situation, and then you'll see next to on the top slide identifier, the title. So I have situation, the next to that task organization. So that's the subparagraph here that you're seeing right in front of you. So this is just, all of this is going to be like a shell. Essentially, I don't have any of it filled out just because I'll just kind of talk over about what you're looking at. So we went over the symbols and what all they look like. So here in the blue rectangles, which is a friendly element, you can put whatever that would be in there. So for us, you would see that mortar symbol, you'd see the air assault identifier at the bottom, and it'd be either a platoon or a section or even squad above, assigning who we have, and then possibly if we have someone attached to us, such as a 60mm mortar section from one of the companies. So then we would go into the area of operation, kind of going into orienting just where north, south, east, and west is, and then any natural borders that might be around us, boxing in everything for what our area of operation is. Again, all this is going off of the map, any natural borders, rivers, stuff like that. Continuing on with area of operation, tracing in where the companies are, where the platoons are going to be located at, familiarizing everyone with any natural terrain, man-made terrain features, and then showing where the friendly graphic control measures are. So the phase lines, restricted firing lines, no fire areas, all of these very important for us to know as mortars, where all the friendly locations are, and get very familiar with the terrain that we're going to be operating in. And then especially key locations such as staging areas, the checkpoints, intersections, helicopter landing zones, airfields. And so that would be where we would physically be located at and where we're going to be operating, and then where we're going to be supporting the other friendly platoons and companies. And then outside of that, we go into the situation of the area of interest. So this is, again, briefed off the map, but this is talking about the enemy. So again, the area of interest is larger terrain-wise in scale outside of the area of operation, what can influence our area of operation. And the way you talk about it and its way it's briefed is based off of what you see on the left. So CAS, close air support, artillery, reinforcements, and any other kind of asset that the enemy can have. So, and you would talk about it through where they are and location, like about what time they'd be there. The trigger being what's going to trigger that asset to come in. So is that going to be if they hear that like if we were to shoot mortar rounds, okay, well, is that going to be the trigger for the enemy artillery there to then start doing a counterfire against us? And then priority of allocation would just be, which one do we think the enemy thinks is going to be more prevalent to use than the other? And a lot of this, the Battalion S2 section comes up with and briefs down, and then we take this, decipher it, and then push it down to you guys. Again, staying in the situation paragraph, but now the subparagraph of terrain. This is broken down in multiple other small subsections. The first one here being obstacles. So it's important to know about obstacles existing and reinforcing what's a natural, what's man-made, and which ones are tactical, which ones are protective, and then how it affects the friendly and how it affects the enemy forces. So for us, we put an obstacle we use is a protective obstacle being C-wire, constant wire, and then we'll assign it as trying to turn, block, or canalize the enemy. So that's something that we use obstacle-wise, but also for us to understand where can we conduct our movements at in our vehicles, and then also when we're dismounted, conducting our reconnaissance, what natural obstacles might be in our way, or what man-made obstacles could possibly be in our way as we're trying to do reconnaissance of the mortar firing points. So this is the critical element, getting down into, again, being very familiar with and knowing the terrain that you're going to be operating in. And then this continues on to the avenues of approach. And the way we look at this is both mounted, dismounted, and then there at the very bottom you see the air AOA, so the air avenue of approach as well, because it could be a possibility where we're doing an air assault and we have to sling load the 120s in, or we're doing split section and we're having to air assault some of our 81s in. So again, you look at this through the friendly and the enemy viewpoints, and then discussing briefing-wise, it would be based off of the size of the formation that could fit along avenues of approach, certain roads or areas that we can maneuver. The speed, about how fast we can go. So we're going to be in trucks about 90% of the time, so about how fast can we go. The formation that we're going to be in, and then the movement technique that we're going to use for that movement. And then like AOA 1 and AOA 2, those are just examples of naming when you were to look at a map and look at some graphics, just showing you where we're moving at and which avenue approach that we're going to take. And then key terrain, so KT1, KT2, and 3, that's just showing, it would be depicted on a map. It would be like a little purple KT and then have like the 1 or whatever, and this is just showing the key terrain that we need to take. So definitely key terrain for us is MFPs. Mortar firing positions or mortar firing points are definitely key terrain for us to take and to have. And then talking about the friendly and the enemy significance, to kind of the why for that. And then underneath that, talking about the observation and fields of fire. So this is important for us for our 240 positions, ensuring that they can maximize their engagement lines and with the actual range of the weapon systems. And then cover and concealment, because when we're looking for mortar and firing points, does it provide us concealment, but then does it have enough open overhead cover to where we can still fire our rounds at? And then now looking into weather, again, this goes much deeper into just knowing the general what what time is the sun coming up and going down. So visibility, like how far out can we see, the winds, because it's super important for us, knowing that MET data for the Fire Direction Center and the effects that it's going to have on the ground for our friendly forces. Any precipitation, cloud cover, because this could affect air assets, temperature, humidity, things like this could affect some of our optic capability, especially those line units as well. And then knowing how much illumin we're going to have for our night operations, laying in guns at night, and then also knowing when is there going to be total darkness in the evening time. So when the sun is down, but then the moon has not risen yet as well, when that total darkness period is hit. So times like that, and knowing the weather really helps us with our planning considerations for when we want to do our movements and when we want to set in guns, things like that. And going into the enemy now, so now you have a good situation, understanding and awareness of the terrain and what's going on generally. So now talking about the enemy itself. So with us, we would worry about, since we're a battalion level asset, what enemy is the battalion facing? And in the companies that we're aiding and assisting the platoons, like what enemy are they generally going to be facing? So we talk about their general situation, the disposition, again, looking at the map, where are they located at, and then the composition and strength. So just like our task org, here you see an enemy task org in the red diamond shape, and then what kind of enemy could it be, artillery or infantry, wheeled, mechanized, whatever. So, and then you see how many weapons, what's their strength, if they have any vehicles, how many do they have, just giving you guys a good, clear picture of what kind of enemies out there that we could possibly, one, come into contact with, and two, who we're shooting rounds at. And then a general way to discuss enemy, it's through warfighting functions, or WFF. You see in that top left of that table. And their intelligence, move, maneuver, fires, protection, sustainment, and mission command. So just the big takeaways from this are just what capabilities they have, and then try to exploit the weaknesses. So this helps us understand where are they strong, where are they weak, and kind of just what's the so what of it, and where are they vulnerable at, so that we can try and exploit it a little bit more for our advantage. And then here going into the enemy course of action statement. So it's important that we do enemy first so that we can depict on the map and kind of have a very good, robust understanding of what is the enemy doing and where are they going to be at, how are they going to fight the fight, essentially. So this is just showing how the enemy is going to, what the purpose of their mission, what their decisive point is, and this is also just going to show how they're allocating their assets, who's there. So DO, SO1, SO2, SO3, that means, so DO is decisive operation, SO1 is shaping operation 1, then 2 and 3. So just showing who they have pretty much on the lineup and with their tactical task and their purpose for why they're out there and why they're fighting. And then here this goes into, again, so this is showing the purpose of their assets. So again, just like how we talked about with the area of interest, so this kind of goes a little bit deeper into that, because now how are they going to use their fires, their mortars, if they have it, their attack aviation or their fighter jets, the close air support, if they have engineers, ADA being air defense artillery, how they can use their intel. And then see in bold red right there, brief scheme maneuver off the sit temp. So sit temp's a situational template, and this is just going to be, at this point we're showing how the enemy is going to fight the fight. What are they going to do? Where are they going to be at? Are they entrenched? Are they in bunkers? Are they in dense wooded areas? And this is super important for us to know, especially when we get the call for fires and fire missions, so that we know which kind of rounds, how many rounds we need to be allocating. So then now that we have a good understanding of the enemy, we go into the friendly situation. So again, still in the situation paragraph, but now we're in the friendly subparagraph of this. And this is us just talking about what the mission statement is 2 levels up. So since we are, again, a battalion level asset, it's important for us to know the brigade and the battalion mission statement. So for us, we would need to know the brigade mission and what the brigade commander's intent is, the purpose, and generally understand where all the friendly assets are moving around. And then 1 level up being our battalion. And at times, if we're dedicated to a certain company, what's their mission statement? What are they looking at doing? What's their intent? And then what's the purpose? And then within this, they're gonna even have dedicated task and intent and purpose for fire support, such as mortars. So then now this takes us to the second paragraph of the operation order, which is just the mission statement. And so within this, it's just one sentence. It's going to be who, what, when, where, and why. So who would be such as HC Mortar Platoon destroys enemy logistics center no later than a certain time, date, group, and then the purpose to allow friendly forces freedom of movement. That's just a kind of quick example off the top of my head. And then we would have, again, the commander's intent, and knowing that so that we know, because knowing the intent allows us to know, well, what effect do we need to have on that enemy? And then we would have key tasks listed out. Just as I mentioned before, we'd have essential, implied, as well as specified key task to us. So here, this would be a specified key task. And then an end state. So at end state, what are we trying to have? What kind of effect, or after the operation, what should the terrain generally look like? Who's in control of that terrain? Do we want the enemy destroyed? Do we want them just pushed out of the area? And then civil considerations such as like collateral damage or the general populace kind of win the heart and mind kind of deal. As far as like what do we want out of the civilian piece to this. And now after the mission statement, this takes us into the execution paragraph. So now COA statement or course of action statement. So this just kind of mimics what we talked about with the enemy, but now this is us. And now that we know generally what the enemy is doing, now we can talk about and lay on our plan so that we can combat everything that the enemy plans on throwing at us. So we go into the purpose of the operation, talk about what's decisive, why it's decisive. And then here, what you're seeing below is how we're going to accomplish this. So this goes into task to subordinate units. So this is very pertinent to the line companies, platoons. And it's important for us to know so that we know which platoon is the decisive operation, which one's a shaping operation, what is their task, what's their purpose, and it just helps us frame in our mind who's most likely going to get in contact, who's going to need more rounds, things like that, so that we stay ahead of knowing what's happening. And another important reason why this is important is because if the talk or the TAC was to be compromised, the battalion talk or the battalion TAC, then us as the mortar platoon become the TAC. And all of this information, then it becomes extremely important to know because then we are essentially fighting the fight for the battalion. So then going into, again, course of action statement continued here. This is going to go into our friendly assets. So you see fires, mortars. So what would be our task? What would be our purpose? And then going into all the other types of assets that we have. And then talking about the types of risk and how we're going to mitigate any kind of risk that we might have. And then for us, that would be an example, if there's a linear danger area, that the reconnaissance element, two-gun, when we're doing a recon for the mortar firing point, maybe we don't take a certain type of route because it would make us go across a road unnecessarily. So that's just a small level kind of example for mitigating risk. And then again, course of action end state, talking about in relation to the friendly enemy and then the terrain. And then this would be briefed off a concept sketch. We already talked about overlays and general mission graphics. So this is where that would be shown, showing the phase lines, showing the mission graphics on a map with the overlays. And then here, the concept of the operation. So the operation will be conducted over blank phases. I'm not really sure here. It's showing 5, so this will be 5 phases. And you brief from what beginning and end and then a critical task. So this is painting the big picture. If you're telling a story, this is just the general what the chapters are. So a quick example would be phase 1 begins with the receipt of this operation order and it ends when we SP from the company. And then your critical task being that we conducted PCC, PCI, for example. And whatever phase 1 ends with, that is what phase 2 would begin with. So then phase 2 would begin with the SP from the company area. So like phase 1 would be planning and preparation. Phase 2 would be the movement to either your assembly area or your occupation or objective rally point, something like that. So this is just generally showing how the operation is going to go down. And for us, it's important because this is, as we do the big muscle movements, everyone in the platoon should know, okay, now we just occupied our mortar firing point, so we should be, for example, in phase 3, which is actions on the objective, which would be then receiving and executing fire missions, as an example. So then here, this would be part of the scheme maneuver. Now this goes into very grave detail. It would be about which phase, what it begins with, ends with, the critical task. What is the enemy doing during this phase while we are executing this phase? What's the enemy doing? Where the adjacent units are? What are they doing? And then what our friendly tasks are for the platoons, the squads. What are they doing in their patrol base? What are they doing in movement with rehearsals? Direct fire control plan. So if they were to set up a no fire area over their patrol base, again, that's critical for us to know what their weapon control status is, their location of their key leaders, the location of their casualty collection point, enemy personnel holding areas, medevacs and HLZs, and then assigning. Here you see who is responsible for, and then you would put a name next to that because you're saying, okay, you are responsible for this. So task subordinate units, and then even more into movement, order of movement, movement techniques and formations. So this goes into the by detail plan, and you would have it over an overlay to where everyone again can look at it, and then this would be used. What you see on the screen or here on the slide is just what you're kind of talking about, kind of keynotes, and then you're using the map and using your overlays to discuss what the actual plan is. And then fires plan, it's a TD LODAC here. So this, obviously we would have copies of this and as well as the fires matrix overall, and the FDC would have this, and then that way we just know exactly where all the targets are, what kind they are, and this really goes into what the attack guidance is and comms. And even if it's not a mortar target, it's important for us to still know if it's an artillery target, because that is something that could be allocated down to a 120 kind of on order, and we just have to be ready to fire that mission. And then this leads into the last piece of the execution paragraph, which is the coordinating instructions. So here you would provide a planning and then an execution of task subordinate units, like per squad. Examples being who's going to create the terrain model. So one gun, you're going to create, your task is to create terrain model during the planning phase. 4 gun, your task is to create the overlays, or that would be probably something for like an RTO to do. And then execution wise, so 3 gun, your task is your primary aid and litter, things like that. Would also have the timeline shown to everyone to where you see the time, the location, uniform, priority of any rehearsals, confirmation briefs, inspections, movement details, the whole execution timeline being established. And then CCIR, so this is the Commander's Critical Information Requirements, and it is composed of PIR and FFIR. So the PIR is the Priority Intelligence Requirements, and this is intelligence that the commander is going to need for planning and decision making. So this is a huge piece of what the scouts do, the scout platoon, answering this PIR, helping company commanders and the battalion commander and the S3 making decisions, which do affect where we establish MFPs and if we need to break down or conduct roving gun or split section operations. And then FFIR, which is friendly force information requirements. This is to, again, allow commanders to know about friendly force. So an example being if a mortar tube was to go down, that would be a huge information requirement about friendly forces to report up. And then ROE, this helps us know the engagement criteria, any restrictions and constraints for friendly forces, and especially us as mortars of, where can we and where can we not fire at, or types of rounds that we could or could not fire, things of that nature. And this leads into paragraph 4, which is sustainment. So if it's not already covered in the scheme maneuver, you would then again go over the priority of support before, during, after missions, specifically hitting on classes 1, 3, and 5. Class 1 being your food and water, class 3 being generally your fuel, class 5 being the ammunition, again, for mortars, and especially the 60s sections. This is critical and very important. Especially when it comes to trying to set smoke screens for some of the line companies and platoons, because that is a heavy ammunition requirement for us. And then trying to project to know when we'll be able to do resupply, having to secure that resupply element coming in, and then especially as we're setting an MFP and letting the gun positions know, all right, we have a resupply coming in, just be prepared, things like that. And then any maintenance priorities that we might have if a tube or a site or something like that was to have an issue. And then especially important being the medical support. So where HLZ is located, MFPs usually turn out to be locations that can definitely support an HLZ, which is important for us to know and be able to pull those grids and to know, and then to send them up as well. Any names of HLZs, the dust off frequency. So dust off is the medical bird that comes in, the helicopter that would come in. And then methods of marking HLZs, marking AXPs, which is an ambulance exchange point. So if we were to do CASEVAC and have to put a casualty in one of the vehicles and then take them to a pre-designated ambulance exchange point, and then marking stuff at day and night based off our SOPs. And then this goes into the last paragraph, which is command and control. So knowing where the locations of commanders, as well as platoon leaders. So for us, where I'm located, platoon sergeant, second sergeant, the FDC, because sometimes in MFPs, where the FDC and headquarter trucks are, sometimes change. And then if we were dismounted, where is everyone going to be located at? We have our SOPs established for a reason, and that's to help facilitate this. And then signal here being the communication assets that we have. How are we going to talk to everyone? How do we talk to the battalion fires, battalion command, use of the JBCP, use of our platoon internal comms, and then PACE being the primary alternate contingency and emergency way of communicating with everyone. And then especially important to know, again, PACE plans for shifting fire and ceasing fire, and then what the challenge and password is. So again, when we have elements that we may not know, approaching our location, hitting them with a challenge, and then having to respond back with the password. So with that, review back through the video and discuss this with your squad leader, section sergeant. I know this is definitely a whole lot of information, but this is going to help us when it comes to trying to increase and build on our own speed and being able to speak the same language and know when we're looking at operations order, because that's how we get our mission sets. And when we go out to the field, it all starts with receiving that operation order, and to just have a general understanding, and then allow squad leaders to be able to take in all this information, then to brief it down to the soldiers so everyone's on the same page. And then you can expect the next class is going to be mortar survivability techniques next week. So thank you all for your time.